Welcome back. Out here, survival is not always about strength. It is about timing, access, and who gets to decide what disappears. This story begins on Lysander Station, a working habitat where systems run smoothly right up until they do not. You will follow one rescuer, one set of eyes, and one chain of choices under a ticking clock. If you want answers, listen for what people avoid saying. Ronan Vale stood on the cargo ring of Lysander Station and kept his breathing slow on purpose. The air smelled of cold metal and packing foam, and the floor plates trembled with the steady push of distant engines. He worked salvage rescue for hire, the kind of job that paid in silence and bad air. This shift was supposed to be routine, until an emergency order hit his wrist screen and refused to blink away. The order came from a Lysander Station authority, stamped urgent. The enforcement arm assigned to respond was Kestrel Private Security, the people who carried rifles and wrote rules with locked doors. Ronan did not trust either side, but he understood the math they lived by. If the authority called Kestrel, it meant the station wanted control, not answers. Ronan had seen enough stations survive by cutting away a problem. The notice said contamination on the cargo ring, and he could tell the ring could be sealed and dumped to keep the habitat breathing. He had learned to treat purge timers like gravity, simple and unmoved by anyone's opinion. 1 hour remained until an emergency purge would leave the sealed sector empty and freezing. His goal was also simple, at least on paper. Pull one living person out of a sealed lab before the purge started. Get out before Kestrel decided a rescuer counted as a threat. Ronan read that part without blinking. One detail made the order feel wrong in his gut. The file included a single warning line about a white frost sighted near the lab. Ronan had seen ice, chemical foam, and coolant leaks, but he had never seen a station put a color into a containment notice. He started moving before anyone could argue him out of it. He walked fast, but not frantic, because frantic people got stopped and stopped people ran out of time. The cargo ring was a loop of storage bays, lifts, and service spines that never slept. Fork! Drones hummed along lanes that glowed faint blue. The air tasted sharp, as if the ventilation had been turned up too high. At the sealed sector, the main gate looked like a mouth clamped shut. The blast door was thick, painted gray, and banded with locks meant to open only for authorized crews. He crouched, ran a gloved hand along the seam, and felt warmth where there should have been none. Someone had been here recently, and they had fought the door hard enough to leave faint smears on the metal. Drag marks cut shallow grooves in dust that led away from the gate and into a service corridor. The tracks were fresh, and that mattered more than any rumor. Ronan stood, glanced once at the camera above the door, and lifted his wrist so it could see his badge. He did not talk to the camera like it was a person, because it never helped. He tried the manual override anyway, because you always try the obvious first. The panel rejected him with a soft buzz, as polite as a doorbell. Ronan breathed out through his nose and turned away from the gate. If the front stayed locked, he would go through the back, and if the back was locked, he would make a new door. He headed into the maintenance spine, with a lighting change from clean white to a tired amber. The walls narrowed, and the cargo ring sounds faded behind him into the low hum of pumps and the ticking of thermal pipes. He did not like the feeling that cameras were tracking him. It felt like being guided, the way a hunter guides prey toward a corner. Ronan took the first turn toward a ladder well, because it was the fastest path to the lab sector underside. He took the second turn because the warning map on his screen showed a dead end ahead, and he wanted to see who had marked it. At the third turn, a voice snapped from a wall speaker. "Stop where you are." Ronan stopped, because stopping bought him a fraction of a second to read the room. 3 Kestrel officers stepped out from behind a bulkhead, weapons down but ready, faces hidden behind clear visors. Their leader wore a black patch on his shoulder with a simple Kestrel mark. His stance said he had done this for years, and he expected the corridor to obey him. "You are entering a restricted zone," the leader said. "Turn around." Ronan kept his hands visible and his voice flat. "I have a rescue order." "Rescue orders do not override containment," the leader said. "Turn around." Ronan looked past them, not at their faces, but at the space behind them. The corridor behind Kestrel was clear, too clear, as if they had been waiting here the whole time. He did not argue, because arguments were what Kestrel wanted. Ronan's job was to move, not to win debates. Who was inside the lab? Ronan asked. I need a name. The leader's visor reflected corridor lights, hiding his eyes. You do not need a name. You need to leave. Ronan nodded once, as if he accepted it. Then he turned, walked 2 steps away, and slipped into a side hatch that Kestrel had not covered. The hatch led into a narrow crawlway that ran along the ring thermal lines. Ronan moved low and quick, boots scraping lightly, shoulders brushing insulation. Behind him, Kestrel shouted and moved, but the crawlway swallowed sound. He kept going, because the moment you got chased was the moment you learned how serious the enemy was. The crawlway dropped him into a refrigeration junction, where the station stored coolant and kept certain bays cold for sensitive cargo. The air bit at his lungs, and his visor fogged for a heartbeat before clearing. Ronan checked his timer again. The number had not changed much, but it felt heavier because fear makes minutes denser. He took one careful step forward, then another, and that was when he saw it. On the steel rail beside him, a pale film clung to the metal like frost, but it did not sparkle like ice. It looked wrong, more like dry paint than water. It spread in thin veins, reaching toward his glove as if the heat of his hand was a scent. Ronan pulled back and kept his glove off the rail. He did not panic, but he let the sight settle in his mind. The warning line about white frost had been real. That meant the rest of the warnings might be real too. He forced himself to answer the simple question first. He was crossing the cold junction to reach the lab from below, because the main gate was locked and Kestrel was blocking the service spine. He moved along the refrigeration line, stepping around coils and crates. The frost appeared again on a wall brace, thin and quiet, like something that had learned to hide. He reached a side bay and found a medical kit torn open on the floor. Gauze packets and sealant strips were scattered, and the portable oxygen mask was missing. Someone had staged triage here, and then someone had ripped the tools away. That did not fit a clean containment response, and it did not fit an accident. A sound came from the far end of the bay, a muffled thump and a sharp intake of breath. Ronan moved toward it, slow enough not to slip, fast enough not to waste time. A maintenance worker was pinned against a fire door jammed half shut. The man was older, wearing a utility jacket and a station badge, and his face was tight with fear. Ronan stayed low and kept his voice steady. I'm going to open this. Do not pull against it. The man nodded hard, as if any other motion would get him cut in half. His hands shook, but he kept them where Ronan could see them. Ronan braced one boot against the floor lip, gripped the emergency crank, and turned. The door resisted, then shifted, releasing a hiss of warmer air. The man stumbled free and grabbed the wall. Ronan caught his elbow and steadied him without making it a big moment. Where did they go? Ronan asked. Whoever moved through here. The workers swallowed and blinked fast. They took the cold route. They said it was safer. They said the frost follows heat. Who said that? Ronan asked. The worker hesitated, eyes flicking toward the corridor that led back to the crawlway. Security, not station cops. The private ones. Ronan filed it away and did not waste time blaming anyone. Blame did not pull people out of sealed rooms. The worker tried to speak again, but his voice cracked and fear swallowed the rest. Ronan cut him off gently, because a warning is only useful if it does not freeze you in place. Go to the nearest safe bay, Ronan said. Stay where the air is warm and the doors are open. The worker nodded and started moving, and Ronan watched long enough to be sure he would not collapse. Then he turned back to the task because the timer did not care about kindness. The cold route ran deeper, and the frost appeared in short bursts along handrails and bolts. It was never thick or dramatic, just present, like a warning written in a language the station refused to read. He reached the underside access for the sealed lab sector, a narrow hatch marked with hazard decals. The hatch was locked, but the lock was older and mechanical, the kind salvage crews could handle. Ronan took out a compact tool from his belt and worked the latch. He did not rush, because a snap tool would cost more time than careful hands. The lock gave way with a soft click. Ronan opened the hatch and leaned in, smelling stale air and something faintly sweet, like overheated plastic. He slid inside and sealed the hatch behind him. In this space, the station felt less like a machine and more like a trapped animal. A low chime rolled through the ductwork, and a calm voice followed, the kind that tried to make panic sound unreasonable. The console on the wall displayed a line that read, "Containment Protocol, pending purge." Ronan did not read it twice. He moved through the underside corridor, mapping each turn in his head, because memory is faster than a screen when seconds matter. A shape moved at the far end, not a person, just a shadow that shifted and vanished. Ronan stopped and listened, and the station answered with silence. Then he heard the first real sound from inside the sealed sector. A faint knock, soft and uneven, like someone using the last of their strength to tap on metal. Ronan followed it until he reached a door with a small viewport. The glass was fogged from the inside, and a pale smear crossed it, like frost dragged by a hand. He set his palm near the metal without touching it and spoke low. "I'm here to get you out. If you can hear me, knock once." The answer came, barely audible, a single knock that sounded like hope trying not to break. Ronan lifted his tool again, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the lock. He began to open the door anyway. His fingers stayed steady on the pick, because rushed hands break tools. When the lock finally gave, he pulled the door inward and let the first breath of cold roll past his visor. Cold air carried that faint, sweet bite again, and it made his throat tighten. The sealed lab lights were low, and a pale film clung to corners and rails the way lint clings to a jacket. Ronan kept his gloves off the coated metal and stepped around it. He found a survivor on the far side of the lab, slumped against a cabinet. She was small under an emergency blanket, breathing shallow, eyes open but unfocused. Ronan dropped to a knee beside her, close enough to help but not crowding her. "I am Ronan. I'm here to get you out. Can you hear me?" Her lips moved, and a whisper came out rough and thin. Yes. That single word mattered more than any warning label. Ronan checked her wristband, then looked for a badge clipped to her coat. The badge read Dr. Celine Cade. Under it, in smaller print, it said Contract Xenobiology. Ronan kept his face still because surprise wastes air. "Celine, I need you awake enough to hold on. We are leaving now." Her eyes tracked him, slow but present. "They will not let us." Ronan could tell what she meant without needing details, because Kestrel did not give second chances when the station called something contamination. He wrapped one arm behind her shoulders and lifted, careful not to jolt her ribs. She was light in a way that made him think she had been cold for a long time. The white film traced a thin line along a cabinet edge near her elbow, and he shifted his grip so her sleeve would not brush it. He moved toward the lab door with Celine half against him. He kept the job simple in his head, get the living person out before the purge, and solve lies later if he survived first. A sound snapped from the corridor outside, boots on metal. Ronan froze and listened, then tightened his hold. A voice called from the other side of the door. "Open it and step out." Ronan answered in a steady tone that gave nothing away. "I am escorting a patient. I am leaving the sector." "Not with her," the voice said. "Put her down and step out." Celine tensed against him, and he felt her fear like a tremor. Ronan did not waste time asking why they wanted her so badly. He scanned the lab with quick eyes, looking for structure before he looked for courage. He spotted a service hatch on the back wall, half hidden behind a lab bench. The hatch had a manual wheel lock, old and stubborn. Ronan shifted Celine onto his shoulder in a controlled lift. She made a small sound, but she held on, fingers gripping his suit sleeve. He crossed the lab in a fast walk, staying off rails and bracing himself when the floor plating vibrated. The white film rippled along a pipe clamp as he passed, as if responding to his warmth. Ronan reached the service hatch and spun the wheel. It resisted, then gave, and the hatch swung open into a narrow maintenance run. He did not hesitate, because hesitation is how doors become graves. Ronan stepped through, pulled Celine with him, and swung the hatch shut behind them. A hard thud hit the hatch a heartbeat later, and the metal rang through the run. The white film spread in a thin bloom along the hatch rim. Ronan did not look back. The run was tight, a spine of pipes and cable trays that smelled of dust and cold lubricant. He kept his shoulder angled so Celine would not scrape the wall. "Stay with me," Ronan said. "If you feel like you are fading, tell me." Celine swallowed and forced her voice out. "Air hurts." Ronan heard it and filed it as a clue, not a mystery to solve right now. "We will keep it steady." Small breaths. They reached a junction where the run opened into a maintenance vestibule, and the temperature shifted warmer by a few degrees. Ronan took that as a sign he was nearing the service corridors under the cargo ring. He checked his wrist screen again. The purge timer still counted down, and the numbers felt like a hand on his neck. Ronan had seen purge routines used as a blunt tool on bad days. He could tell the station would dump one section so the rest could keep breathing, and it would not ask who deserved to be inside. He turned left at the next split, because the map showed a climb route that bypassed the main gate. He chose it because Kestra would expect him to run for the obvious exit. They climbed a short ladder into a utility hall where the walls were painted. Safety yellow. Ronan kept moving because stillness is how you get surrounded. A door ahead slammed shut, then opened halfway, then shut again. Ronan stopped because the station was changing the corridor in front of him like someone was building a trap in real time. He advanced slowly, using his shoulder to shield Celine. The door ahead opened fully, and a gust of air pulled at their clothes, like the hall was inhaling. Ronan stepped through, and the door behind them slammed shut. The door in front snapped open, then closed, then opened again, like it was hurting them forward. Celine coughed once, a small dry sound that made Ronan tighten his grip. She pressed her face against his shoulder, trying to find a pocket of calmer air. Ronan had worked pressure corridors during fires and hull leaks, and he could tell the station was cycling fire doors to steer airflow. Each shift mattered because Celine was weak, and every pull made breathing harder. He set his jaw and moved because stopping in a pressure run was how people turned into statistics. The next door slammed, and Celine sagged. Ronan lowered her for a moment against the wall, keeping her upright. He pulled a compact emergency oxygen mask from his kit, the kind that buys you minutes, not miracles. He pressed it over her mouth and nose and held it there. Celine's eyes fluttered, then steadied, and her shoulders eased just enough to keep her from slipping away. Ronan hated the trade he was making. Every tool he used now was one less tool later, and later might be worse. The door ahead opened, and he lifted Celine again. He moved through, then turned his body sideways as the door behind tried to slam into his back. He caught it with his boot and shoved it open long enough to slip past. The pattern was too clean, too deliberate, and that was the point. Someone was timing the doors like a drummer, keeping a beat that only Ronan could hear. He reached a control panel, slapped it open, and yanked the manual handle to force the next door to stay open. The panel screamed a short alarm, and the hall lights flickered, but the door held. Ronan carried Celine through the open doorway and into the filtration corridor. The air changed there, dry and sharp like it had been scrubbed. Too hard. A filter stack ran along one wall, and floor grates vibrated with a steady pull. Celine made a small sound against his shoulder. Ronan listened, because her body was speaking before her words could. "Stop," Celine whispered. "If it cycles again, I cannot." Ronan answered with action, because that was the only kind of reassurance that counted. He tightened the oxygen mask strap and shifted her weight so her chest could expand more freely. He looked down the corridor and spotted a service hatch on the right, a shortcut into a maintenance bypass. He moved toward it because he needed out of the pressure run before the next cycle hit. A voice snapped over a speaker, close enough to feel personal. "Oh non vale." Put her down. Ronan did not flinch, but his mind went cold and clear. They knew his name, which meant this was no longer a random containment response. He spoke toward the nearest wall speaker, keeping his words short. "I am leaving. Do not force a collapse." "You have no authority here," the voice replied. "The station is under containment order. You are interfering." Ronan did not waste breath arguing. He moved to the service hatch and started turning the wheel. The hatch would not open. It was locked with a fresh pin installed from the other side. Ronan felt anger rise like heat, then forced it down. Anger is a luxury, and he had less than an hour. He turned back to the main corridor because he had no choice. The door behind them slammed shut again, and the air tugged hard at their clothes. Celine gasped under the mask, fingers clawing at his shoulder. Ronan planted his boots wide, lowered his center of gravity, and became the steady thing in the middle of the pull. He lifted Celine's head slightly and spoke into her ear. "Look at me. You breathe when I tell you." "Now." Celine's eyes found his, and she nodded, small and desperate. Ronan waited for the pressure shift to ease, then moved in quick steps, using the moment like a runner uses a gap. He reached the far door and forced it open with both hands. They stumbled into a warmer service bay, and the door shut behind them with a heavy clang. The air here did not tug as hard, and Celine's breathing steadied. Ronan lowered her onto a bench, keeping her upright. Celine touched the edge of his glove with shaking fingers. "They did not send you." Ronan watched her face, reading the effort it took to speak. "The order came from the station authority." Celine shook her head, slow and pained. "Not from medical." Ronan felt the story shift under his feet. That was the first layer of the lie, and it told him this was about power, not safety. He kept his voice even. "Who did it come from?" Celine closed her eyes, then forced them open again. "A director account. Not a name, just a role." Ronan had watched stations hide decisions behind roles before. Someone with station control was steering the trap, and Kestrel was the muscle. Celine reached in her coat with a slow, careful motion, like her ribs hurt. She pulled out a small sealed capsule no bigger than a thumb and held it in her palm. Ronan did not touch it. He watched it like it might bite. "It is not a sample like you think," Celine said. "It is proof." Ronan kept his face blank, because he did not have time for shock. "Proof of what?" Celine swallowed. "Of what they did in that lab. People died." Ronan heard the human part first, because a dead body always meant a choice somewhere. Someone had decided speed mattered more than safety, and now they were trying to erase the witness. He leaned closer, voice low, like he was making a promise without dressing it up. "Keep that on you. If they take it, you are just another body in a purge." Celine's hand trembled, but she closed her fist around the capsule. "They want it more than they want me." Ronan believed her, because the trap was too precise. He checked his timer again, and his throat tightened. They had less time than he wanted, and he still had to cross doors that did not want to open. Ronan stood and scanned the bay. The service area had tools, spares, and a wall cabinet labeled emergency. He opened it and found a second oxygen mask and a small pressure stabilizer pack. He strapped the stabilizer pack to Celine's side and tightened it. It was not a miracle, just a way to smooth the next pressure hit so her lungs would not have to fight as hard. Celine watched him with tired eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Ronan answered with the simplest truth he could afford. "Because you are alive. Because they're trying to make you disappear." He helped Celine stand, keeping her weight against him. He was about to move her out of the bay when a muffled shout echoed through the wall. A metal scraping sound followed, then a sharp bang, like someone had been slammed into a door. Ronan froze because that was not a door cycling, that was a person in trouble. He guided Celine to the bench again and kept his voice controlled. "Stay here for 10 seconds. Hold the bench and do not move." Celine stared at him. Fear and trust tangled together. "Ronan, do not." Ronan did not argue. He stepped into the adjacent utility corridor because leaving someone to die in a trap would break him in a way he could not fix later. The corridor was narrow, lined with pipe jackets and cable bundles. He moved fast, but he kept his steps quiet. He found a technician pinned near a floor grate, half on his side, one arm caught beneath a sliding panel. The panel had dropped during a pressure cycle and jammed him. The technician's face was pale, eyes wide. He was breathing too fast, and Ronan knew that would make the air feel thinner than it was. Ronan crouched and made the goal clear. "I'm getting your arm free. Do not pull. Tell me your name." "Jace," the man rasped. "Jace, look at me," Ronan said. "You breathe slow. I lift, you slide out." Jace nodded, jaw clenched. Ronan wedged his tool under the panel edge and levered. The panel shifted a fraction, then stuck again. Ronan adjusted his angle and pushed harder, using his legs, not his back. The panel lifted enough for Jace to yank his arm free and roll away. Jace gasped, then laughed once, a broken sound, and Ronan did not let him drift. "Get up," Ronan said. "Move with me. Where's the nearest open bay?" Jace pointed down the corridor. "2 doors. Left." Ronan grabbed Jace's collar and hauled him upright. He was not gentle, but he was not cruel, and he did not linger on injury details. They moved quickly, and Ronan kept the goal small and short phrases so panic would not steal their legs. He got Jace into an open bay because a second cycle could drop again and take more than an arm. They slid inside, and Ronan shoved the door control to keep it from cycling shut. Celine was still at the bench in the first bay, pale but upright, and she looked at Ronan, then at Jace, and understood the cost without him saying it. He returned to Celine and hooked her arm over his shoulder again. Ronan carried both the mission and the consequences, because that was what his job had always been. Jace swallowed hard. Security is saying they are purging early. Ronan felt the words land like cold water. "How do you know?" Jace pointed at a wall speaker. "They said it over the line. They said the ring is compromised." A calm announcement rolled through the bay, too calm to be kind. The console on the wall displayed a line that read "Purge rescheduled." Ronan did not need details. Rescheduled meant sooner, and sooner meant he had to move now. He spoke toward the speaker as if the person listening could be reasoned with. "I am evacuating a living witness. If you purge early, you kill her and everyone's still inside." The speaker answered with a different voice than before, smoother and more official. "Evacuation is not authorized. Stand down." Ronan heard the weight behind that voice. That was not a hallway officer, and he could tell it came from someone who could command doors and air. Celine's fingers tightened on his sleeve. "They're doing it. They are ending it." Ronan looked at the corridor exit, then at the timer on his wrist. He made the next goal small enough to carry. "We are leaving this bay," he said. "We take the service spine to the cargo lift, and we do not stop again unless someone is blocking the door." Jace swallowed. "What about the rest of the ring?" Ronan did not pretend he could save everyone. "If we get out, we can force them to open routes. If we die in here, nothing changes." He shifted Celine's weight higher and checked the oxygen mask seal. Then he nodded once at Jace. "You can walk?" Ronan asked. Jace flexed his arm and winced, then nodded. "Yes." "Then stay behind me," Ronan said. "If Kestrel shows up, you do what I say." They stepped into the service corridor together, Ronan in front. Celine pressed against him, Jace trailing close. The air felt thinner than before, not because it was gone, but because the station had decided it could be taken away at any moment. Behind them, the wall speaker clicked, and a final line cut through the hum. "Initiate early purge." He took them down the maintenance spine to avoid the main axis where Kestrel was hunting. His goal was narrow: reach a rescue pod or an open cargo lift before the early purge stripped the ring of air. The service corridor sloped downward in a gentle curve, metal ribs arching overhead like the inside of spine. Ronan moved at a steady pace, because rushing on slick plating would cost more time than it saved. Celine was more awake now, her weight less dead on his shoulder. The oxygen mask fogged with each breath, but her eyes were focused. "The frost," she whispered. "It reacts to heat." Ronan did not ask how she knew. He only asked what mattered. "Does it spread on its own?" "It spreads toward warmth," she said. "Toward airflow." Ronan filed it away as something practical. The white frost was not just a film on cold metal. It was searching for temperature and circulation like mold chasing moisture. He turned them into a side branch labeled waste return, because it was farther from central ventilation trunks. He was choosing narrower corridors to avoid both Kestrel and the frost. The frost was thicker here, not in patches, but in thin veins that traced seams between panels. Ronan kept his boots off the seams and avoided touching railings. Celine shifted in his hold. The experiment was supposed to adapt microorganisms to extreme cold. Instead, it learned to move along thermal gradients. Ronan kept her moving and kept his voice flat. "You tell me later. Right now you breathe and you walk when I tell you." Celine nodded and forced herself upright. She wanted to carry some of her own weight, and he let her because that preserved his strength. A junction opened into a narrow service deck where old cargo rails were stacked against the wall. Ronan guided Celine to the right because the left branch angled back toward the security wing. The white frost traced a faint curve along the base of the wall ahead. It was thicker near a vent grill, and Ronan felt a draft against his cheek. "It is moving toward the vents," Celine said. "If it reaches the main ventilation trunk, it spreads everywhere." Ronan understood that without needing a diagram. A vent is a highway for air, and anything that rides air can go everywhere at once. "How bad?" Ronan asked. Celine swallowed. "If it stabilizes, it survives purge cycles. It feeds on temperature change." Ronan straightened, and that was the part that mattered. It meant the purge was not a cure, it was fuel. He tightened his grip on Celine's arm. "Then we do not let it reach the trunk." He led her past the vent, keeping distance from the frost veins. The corridor bent again and opened into a broader maintenance gallery under the cargo deck. The ceiling was higher here, crossed with cable trays and coolant pipes. Ronan could hear movement above, boots and shouted orders, and he knew Kestrel was repositioning. He angled them toward a ladder well that led down one more level. He needed to get below the main sweep. Halfway to the ladder, a door at the far end of the gallery slammed open. Two Kestrel officers stepped through, weapons raised but not yet firing. Ronan pulled Celine behind a stack of old cargo rails and lowered her to a crouch. He was not trying to win a firefight. He was buying seconds to break line of sight and reach the ladder. The officers fanned out, boots echoing on metal. One of them shouted, "Ronan Vale, stand down." Ronan leaned out just enough to see positions. He grabbed a loose rail and shoved it hard. The rail stack toppled, clanging and scattering across the gallery floor. The noise forced the officers to step back, and Ronan used the moment to drag Celine to the ladder well. He hooked one arm around a rung and half slid, half climbed down, keeping her tight to him. They hit the lower deck with a jolt, and Ronan did not pause to feel it. He pulled the ladder access panel down and jammed it with a broken rail bracket. It would not hold long, but it would slow pursuit. The lower level was darker and colder, a ring of secondary systems feeding the main cargo deck. The air felt heavier here, and Celine leaned against the wall, breathing hard but steady. "You move like you have done this before," Celine said. Ronan did not answer the compliment. "You said the experiment killed people. Was it an accident or a decision?" Celine met his eyes. It was a choice. She pushed herself upright and kept talking because she knew silence would swallow her courage. The frost was unstable at first. It died when the lab temperature fluctuated, so they changed the protocol. Ronan kept them moving along the lower ring, scanning corners and overhead lines. "Change how?" "They introduced living carriers," Celine said. "They used human test subjects to maintain heat gradients." Ronan felt something hard settle in his chest. "Volunteers." Celine's mouth twisted. No, he did not need details to understand why someone with a director account would risk a purge to erase her. Ronan could tell the station could survive an investigation, but it could not survive the wrong people hearing the truth. A vibration rippled through deck plates, deeper than a door slam. Ronan checked his wrist screen and saw the purge timer dropping faster than it should. "We have less time," Ronan said. "We cut across to the auxiliary hangar." Celine blinked. "That is closer to the central axis." "It is also where the emergency pods are stored," Ronan said, "and the only place with manual override on the vent trunk." He was choosing risk over certainty. Staying hidden would keep them alive for minutes, not save the ring. They moved faster now, footsteps echoing in the lower deck corridor. Ronan kept one hand on Celine and one free. The white frost appeared again along a coolant pipe overhead, thicker this time, branching like pale veins. It pulsed faintly when a gust of air passed. "It is spreading," Ronan said. Celine looked up and saw it too. "It is following the airflow from the purge staging." Ronan picked up his pace, because the station attempt to flush contamination was feeding it movement. He led Celine through a side door into a maintenance cross corridor that angled toward the auxiliary hangar. The corridor narrowed, then widened into a half-circular chamber with a lift platform in the center. The lift led up to the hangar deck, and the platform was retracted. Ronan crossed to the wall panel and slapped it open. The manual lever was intact, and he pulled it down. The lift groaned and began to rise from below, slow and heavy. Footsteps thundered behind them, and Ronan knew Kestrel had found the lower ring. He stepped between Celine and the corridor entrance. He was holding ground because the lift needed seconds he did not have. 2 officers rounded the corner, weapons raised, and this time they did not shout a warning. Ronan grabbed a loose tool cart and kicked it hard into their path. It struck one officer in the shin and forced both to adjust. Ronan closed the distance before they could fire cleanly, slammed his shoulder into the nearest officer, and drove him into the wall. The second officer fired, but the shot went wide and sparked against the deck. Ronan pivoted, struck the weapon arm, and sent the weapon skidding across the floor. He did not linger. He shoved the first officer down and kicked the second in the knee, just enough to drop him. The lift platform clanged into place behind him. Ronan grabbed Celine and hauled her onto the platform. He slammed the control lever up. The lift rose, metal scraping and vibrating under their feet. The hangar deck opened above them, lit in harsh white strips. Emergency pods lined the curved wall like sealed coffins. Ronan stepped off the lift and guided Celine toward the nearest pod rack. He was moving her to a pod because a pod could detach and clear the ring before the purge reached this level. A security shutter began to slide down at the far end of the hangar. Kestrel was sealing exits. Ronan reached a pod and yanked open its access panel. The interior lights flickered to life. Celine caught his wrist. "If I leave, they seal the ring and say I was never here." Ronan met her gaze. "If you stay, they erase you." The white frost traced a thin line along a ceiling vent above the pod rack. Ronan saw it and felt urgency spike. Celine pulled the small capsule from her coat again. She held it between them, steadying her hand by force of will. "They want this," she said. "The data is encoded in a biological matrix. It cannot be copied without killing it." Ronan understood enough to move. The proof was alive in its own way, and fragile in the wrong hands. "If they take it, they control the story," Celine said. Ronan narrowed his world to 2 goals. Get Celine out and keep the frost from reaching the main trunk long enough to matter. He shoved the capsule into a sealed pouch on his chest rig. "You keep your hands free." Celine stared at him. "You trust me?" "I trust that you want them exposed," Ronan said. The hangar doors at the far side slammed open. A heavier Kestrel unit stepped in, tighter formation, heavier armor, weapons tracking with calm precision. A voice boomed from the overhead speaker. "Honon Vali. Release Dr. Cade and the biological material." Ronan recognized the smooth tone from earlier. It sounded like a director account speaking through security. He spoke low to Celine. "When I say go, you get in the pod and seal it." Celine shook her head. "You will not make it." Ronan did not smile. "I'm not planning to stay." He moved sideways along the pod rack, forcing the unit to split its line of fire. Ronan grabbed a pod release lever and pulled it halfway, and the pod alarm began to chirp a warning of emergency deployment. Kestrel advanced, weapons tracking. Ronan kicked open a manual vent override panel at the base of the rack, and cold air blasted from the duct. The frost above reacted instantly, spreading in a thin wave along the vent lip. The unit hesitated for a beat as the frost began to crawl down the metal frame. Ronan used that beat. He shoved Celine toward the open pod. "Now," Ronan said. Celine climbed in, hands shaking but determined. Ronan slammed the pod door and hit the external seal, and the latch answered with a heavy click. Kestrel opened fire, and shots sparked against the pod shell, but the hull held. Ronan pulled the full release lever, and clamps unlocked with a series of hard metallic thuds. The pod blasted free from its rack and shot toward the hangar exit chute. The security shutter tried to close, but the pod forced through with a scream of metal. Ronan staggered back from the recoil. The heavier unit surged forward. A heavy figure slammed into Ronan from the side and drove him to the deck. A gloved hand ripped at his chest rig, and Ronan rolled to strike back, but another officer pinned his arm. He felt the pouch tear loose. The capsule was wrenched free from his gear. Ronan drove an elbow into a throat and kicked for space, but the proof was already in. Kestrel hands. Above them, the frost reached the central hangar vent grill and slipped into it like smoke into a chimney. Kestrel dragged Ronan back, weapons pressed to his ribs. He lay on cold deck plating, breathing hard, watching white threads vanish into the core airflow. He had lost the proof. He had gotten the witness moving, but he did not know if the pod had cleared the chute or been intercepted beyond it. A calm voice came through the overhead speaker, smooth and unhurried. "This is Director Caldravas. The station will complete purge immediately to protect the habitat." Ronan kept his eyes on the hands holding him, because every team shows you its rules if you look. The restraint band in the nearest officer's hand was not just plastic and metal, and he could tell it carried a network tag that would make every door hate him. Director Voss continued without a hint of doubt. "Ronan Vale is charged with sabotage and interference. Any assistance offered to him will be treated as collusion." Ronan heard the second part as clearly as a lock clicking shut. She was isolating him socially before the air ever left the ring. One officer tightened his grip on Ronan's wrist. "You should have stayed in your lane." Ronan kept his voice level. "My lane is people who still breathe." The officer scoffed, but his grip shifted for a moment. That small shift gave Ronan a fraction of freedom. Ronan drove his elbow backward into ribs, then rolled toward the pod rack. A shot cracked into the deck nearby, bright sparks scattering near his boots, and Ronan froze long enough to listen to what they were afraid of. The lead officer barked an order. "Hold fire. Do not breach the hangar." Ronan kept the reaction inside. They needed the hangar systems intact for the purge, and he could tell that limit could be used like a tool. He grabbed a loose pod clamp bar and swung it low, striking knees and ankles. Two officers stumbled, and Ronan vaulted over a bench and sprinted toward a side service door marked for maintenance. The door should have opened for basic access. It stayed locked, and the panel blinked denial. He slapped it again, got the same answer, and understood the station had already turned on him. Director Voss sounded closer through the speaker, as if she were standing behind his ear. "You're not leaving that deck, Mr. Vale," Voss said. Ronan scanned the hinge seam and found the mechanical pin. He jammed the clamp bar into the seam and twisted until the metal groaned and popped. He shoved the door hard. It swung open into a narrow service corridor, and Ronan slipped through and pulled it closed behind him. Footsteps hammered the other side. He moved deeper because he needed a route to operations, not just distance. The corridor angled down a service ramp and dropped him one level below the hangar deck. A wall lamp shifted from white to warning amber, and a ceiling speaker clicked as if it was listening. A calm announcement rolled through the ductwork and tried to sound routine. Ronan heard his own name again, and it told him the hunt had moved from patrol to pursuit. He cut left through a service junction marked for cargo drone storage. The door sealed behind him with a hard lock sound, and the steps on the other side changed pitch as Kestrel searched for a way around. Cold air crept along the corridor, and a white sheen traced vent edges like frost on a freezer door. Ronan kept his gloves off it and kept moving, because the shortest pauses were where traps finished their work. He turned into a secondary utility deck where cargo drones were stored. The deck lights flickered, and a warning chime sounded once, then cut out. The console near the entrance displayed a line that read, "Medical access restricted." Ronan did not care about the label, only the effect. He heard voices behind a sealed partition, muffled and urgent. Ronan approached the partition door and called through the metal. "Who is in there?" Ronan asked. A voice answered, sharp with fear. "We are maintenance. They locked us in when the purge order changed." Ronan kept his words short. "How many?" "6, the voice said. "One of us is older, and he cannot climb." Ronan looked at the partition lock. It was a simple access wheel, not a network panel, and that meant it could be opened by force. He wedged the clam bar into the wheel and cranked. The wheel fought him, then turned. The door slid open with a hiss. 6 people stared at him, faces pale under work lights. One man stepped forward, a foreman patch on his sleeve. "You are the one security is hunting." Ronan did not deny it. "Yes." If you stay here, you lose your air. If you move with me, you might keep it. The foreman swallowed. They said anyone who helps you is a criminal. Ronan nodded once. Director Voss wants you afraid of a record. She is using that fear while she flushes this ring. A young technician glanced toward the corridor. Why would she do that? Ronan answered with the minimum they needed to act. Because something got into the vents. Because a witness exists. Because the story is easier to control when no one lives long enough to argue. The older man in the back coughed into his sleeve. The sound was weak, and Ronan hated how familiar that weakness was. The foreman tightened his jaw. Where do we go? Ronan pointed down the deck. To the refuge shaft near emergency systems. It leads to a sealed safe bay with independent air. A woman shook her head, eyes wide. Security will stop us. Ronan did not sugarcoat it. Yes, that is why you follow my steps. He turned and started moving. He made them a simple chain: stay close, do not touch vents, and do not stop when doors stutter. They followed because fear is less powerful when you have direction. As they moved, Ronan saw the frost creeping thicker along vent lips overhead. It pulsed faintly with each draft, as if it were tasting airflow. One technician whispered, "Is that ice?" Ronan kept his eyes forward. "It is not normal. Do not touch it." A door ahead slammed shut, then opened halfway, and the group slowed. Ronan raised a hand and kept his voice firm. "Keep moving," Ronan said. "The station is trying to hurt us." The foreman fell in his step beside him. "You said a witness." "Who?" Ronan kept his words practical. "A scientist." Security took the proof. The foreman frowned. "Proof of what?" Ronan answered with a human sentence. "Proof that people died because someone chose speed over safety." The foreman stared at him for a beat, then looked away. "Where is she now?" Ronan did not pretend certainty. "If she is alive, they will keep her near operations, close to Voss and her control." The foreman nodded once. "Then, that is where you're going." Ronan felt the pursuit change before he saw it. Kestrel was no longer sending patrols. They were sending a suppression team. The corridor opened into a long service run with reinforced walls. Ronan saw 4 figures at the far end in heavier armor, moving in a tight wedge. They did not shout warnings. They moved like they expected him to run. Ronan spoke to the group without looking back. "You move to the refuge shaft. I will hold them long enough to close the cross door." The foreman shook his head. "We can help." Ronan looked at the older man, who was breathing too hard already. "You help by getting him out alive." The group hesitated, then moved because Ronan gave them a task they could complete. They peeled off into a side hatch that led toward the safe bay. Ronan stepped into the center of the corridor. He was alone now, which made decisions easier. The suppression team advanced, weapons up but careful. They were not firing wildly, and Ronan could tell they were constrained by the purge. He sprinted to a wall junction box and yanked it open. Inside was a manual pressure damper handle, the kind used during maintenance. Ronan slammed it down. A heavy door in the ceiling duct shifted with a grinding sound, and airflow changed, pulling hard toward the far end. The white frost along the vent lip reacted immediately, crawling toward the new draft like a living stain. Ronan refused to look up longer than a heartbeat. He kicked a floor panel latch, popped it open, and yanked a cable spool from the channel. The cable whipped across the corridor at shin height. The lead officer stumbled. The wedge broke, and Ronan took the gap. He sprinted past them along the left wall, keeping his body tight to avoid being grabbed. A hand brushed his sleeve, but did not catch. A voice barked behind him, sharp with restraint. "Do not shoot," the officer said. "Voss wants him alive." Ronan heard the words and locked onto the implication. Voss needed him not as a body, but as a scapegoat. He ran toward a cross door that separated maintenance from operations. The door was thick and had a manual latch on the inside, and Ronan slammed his shoulder into the latch housing until the mechanism snapped free. He pulled the door shut behind him and threw the manual lever. The lock clanked into place, and the suppression team hit the other side a heartbeat later. The door held. Ronan exhaled once and kept moving, because holding a door is not the same as escaping. He entered the operations access corridor. The walls were cleaner, lighting brighter, vents more numerous, and the frost was here too. It lay thin and patient along vent grills. Ronan checked his wrist timer, and the countdown had dropped into minutes. Ronan could tell operations control was the outer room that routed doors, cameras, and announcement for the ring. He also knew the control core sat deeper, behind thicker barriers and colder air, where the station protected its brain. Ronan carried a small salvage archive drive for disputes, a habit from years of bad employers. As he ran through operations access, he had grabbed raw sensor log from side console and saved them to the drive. He reached the operations vestibule because he followed station layout like a mechanic follows an engine. Operations always sat near the spine, close to power, communications, and main air valves. A heavy door blocked the vestibule, and the panel glowed denial. Ronan found the emergency manual release cover and ripped it off. Inside was a crank wheel and a mechanical lock pin. Ronan yanked the pin and cranked until the door groaned open. Cold air rolled out carrying that same sweet bite from the lab. Ronan could tell the frost had been here longer than he wanted to admit. He stepped inside and pulled the door toward closed as much as it would allow. The vestibule was empty, but corner cameras tracked him. The overhead speaker clicked. Director Voss spoke again, calm and certain. "You are persistent, Mr. Vale," Voss said. Ronan moved toward the next door marked operations control. "You started this. I am finishing it. You broke containment," Voss said. "You endangered lives." Ronan stopped long enough to look at the camera. "You scheduled an early purge to erase a witness. That is not containment." There was a pause, just long enough to feel like calculation. "You are not qualified to judge station policy," Voss replied. Ronan knew the trap she wanted, reckless outsider versus responsible authority. He chose the only question that mattered. "Where is Dr. Cade?" Ronan asked. Voss answered without warmth. "She is secured." Ronan felt a tightness ease in his chest. Celine was alive, at least. "For now. Open the door," Ronan said. "We can do this without killing the ring." "You cannot stop the purge," Voss replied. "It is already in progress." Ronan had seen systems run on momentum once a sequence armed. He also knew every system still had a manual stop somewhere because engineers did not build a machine they could not shut down. He examined the door frame and found the maintenance seam near the hinge. He slid the clamp bar into the seam and twisted until metal complained and the hinge shifted. The speaker snapped sharper. "Stop!" Ronan did not stop. He forced the hinge again. The door popped inward a few inches and Ronan shoved through. The operations control room was larger than he expected, a wide arc of consoles and screens. The screens were dim under a thin white layer that coated them like film. The frost spread across panels and keys, smooth as skin. It pulsed when fans cycled, and Ronan stood still for one clean look. He crossed to the main console, because he had a job to do. He wiped a small area with his sleeve and revealed a status line beneath the film. The console displayed a line that read, "Purge Sequence Armed." Beneath it, another line read, "Manual halt requires director token." Ronan felt the shape of the problem settle into place. He could slow purge pathways, but he could not fully halt them without Voss. He also understood something else, because he could hear the intake fans and feel the draft on his cheek. The frost was already in the air path feeding the whole ring, and Voss was still pretending the purge would fix it. Ronan scanned the console menus and searched for the broadcast uplink that fed internal announcements and emergency channels. If he could push unedited telemetry to the habitat board and emergency responders, Voss could not erase the record with a purge. He did not have the proof capsule anymore. He would need another kind of proof, and he had one. Ronan pulled the salvage archive drive from his belt and kept it in his fist. He could tell the frost was creeping toward his warmth, and he kept his knuckles off the coated surfaces. He opened the uplink panel and found a manual path that did not require director authorization. He triggered the upload and watched the progress. Crawl. The purge timer continued falling, and the vents above him breathed like a throat deciding whether to close. Ronan held his body still and let his eyes do the work. The door behind him opened. Kestrel officers entered, weapons up but careful, and their leader stepped forward with a restraint band ready. "Enough," the leader said. You are coming with us. Ronan kept his voice flat. If you fire in here, you drop core stability and the system vents the ring. Do you want that on your record? The leader hesitated for a fraction. Ronan used that fraction to finish the uplink sequence. The console displayed a line that read, telemetry broadcast active. Ronan exhaled once, not relief, just focus. A new voice cut in over the speaker system, smoother and closer than the others. This is Director Caldra Voss. Stand down and you may live. Ronan did not look at the speaker grill. He looked at the frost at the vent intake, because it was already too close. You cannot outtalk physics, Ronan said. Your purge is feeding it airflow. Voss replied without warmth. Containment requires sacrifice. Ronan answered like a man who had watched sacrifice used as a cover story. No, this requires truth. The officers closed in, and Ronan raised both hands slowly. He did not give them a reason to panic. They marched him out through the outer operations corridors first, and Ronan could tell they were keeping him inside camera coverage. Doors ahead unlocked in sequence while doors behind sealed shut, and the pattern felt like a leash. Operations control gave way to an inner access hall with thicker walls and fewer signs, and Ronan knew he was approaching the control core. The last gate was not a network door at all, and Ronan could tell it was mechanical, the kind that only opened when someone inside physically released the lock. The control core sat at the center of the ring, a round vault of metal ribs and glass panels pulsing with cold blue light. Beneath the floor grating, coolant lines hummed like a low engine under stress. Caldra Voss stood beside the primary command spine, dark uniforms streaked with soot. A small squad of internal security officers spread in a half-circle around her. Their weapons were raised with calm precision. Ronan stopped at the threshold and lifted his hands, palms open. He was not here to trade fire. He was here to prevent a chain reaction. Two emergency systems technicians crouched near a side console, trying to stabilize the auxiliary grid. Ronan could tell from their posture they had been here for minutes, not seconds, and the station was already close to a hard drop. Ronan had learned the core followed a brutal rule. If stability dropped beyond a threshold, the system would protect itself first and vent the ring to vacuum. Step back, Ronan, Caldra said. This is containment. Ronan did not move. You are about to trigger a station-wide purge. Caldra tilted her head slightly, eyes on him like a calculation. If the core drops another 5% in stability, the system will do it for you. Ronan kept his tone level. I am here to keep the core above threshold. That keeps people breathing. One officer shifted aim toward Ronan's chest. You do not have clearance, Caldra said. You are interfering with a sanctioned response. Ronan took a slow breath. He needed seconds, and seconds were oxygen. You framed the outbreak as uncontrolled spread, Ronan said. You push for total purge because it removes witnesses. Her eyes narrowed. You are making accusations. Ronan did not raise his voice. The vent protocol is tied to core integrity, not your authorization code. A technician called out from the side console. Core stability is at 42% and falling. Caldra did not flinch. You are assuming I am afraid of collateral damage. I'm assuming you want control, Ronan said. You cannot control a vacuum. For a fraction of a second, her gaze flicked to the stability meter. That was all he needed. Ronan dropped his hands and lunged sideways, not toward Caldra, but toward a secondary interface panel mounted along the wall. One officer fired, the shot sparking against the metal frame near Ronan's shoulder. Ronan slammed his hand onto the manual override latch. He was not trying to take command from her. He was trying to isolate the core from the command spine. The latch physically decoupled external order channels from the core processor. It was like pulling the plug on a remote control. Ronan yanked the lever down. The room lights flickered, and the command spine behind Caldra dimmed for a heartbeat. Links severed, one technician shouted. Caldra swore under her breath. Now they were fighting over raw hardware, not permissions. The hum under the floor deepened as coolant pumps adjusted to the new configuration. Ronan stayed low behind the interface panel. He did not need to win a gunfight. He needed time for the auxiliary grid to catch up. Auxiliary sync is at 60%, the technician said. We need 90 before the core levels off. Ronan scanned the layout in his head. He knew the core had physical fail-safes, and at least one of them would still be manual. He ripped up a floor grating panel with both hands. Heat blasted his face, and the air tasted like metal. Below, a thick braided conduit fed power from the emergency battery bank directly into the core cluster. It was designed for maintenance, not combat. Calder stepped forward, weapon steady. You are making this worse. No, Ronan said. I am removing your leverage. He reached into the maintenance slot and triggered the battery bank override. The emergency bank was not meant to run the whole station, only to keep the brain alive long enough to recover. The effect was immediate. The stability reading stopped dropping. It did not rise yet, but stopped falling. Stability is holding at 41%, the technician said. Auxiliary is at 75. Caldra's jaw tightened. You are gambling with lives. I'm preventing you from discarding them, Ronan said. He kept his body between her and the maintenance slot. His eyes flicked to the vent grill above the console, where the frost pulsed in thin threads. You claimed the contamination was spreading beyond the quarantine ring, Ronan said. But intersector sensors showed no breach before you changed thresholds. Calder's expression did not change. Her silence did. Ronan pressed forward with the chain, laid out clean. You needed a reason to purge before verification. Once the ring vents, evidence vanishes and witnesses vanish. One security officer shifted uncertainly. Calder's voice sharpened. You are speaking above your rank. I am speaking as the man who broadcast the original telemetry, Ronan said. He pulled the salvage archive drive from his belt and slid it across the floor. It stopped near an officer's boot, and the officer looked down before he looked at Caldera. Original sensor feed, Ronan said. Time stamped before the override. Caldera snapped at the officer. Do not access that. But doubt had already entered the room. The technician called out again, voice tighter with relief. Auxiliary sync is at 90%, the technician said. Core stabilizing. The stability number ticked upward. 42, then 43. The vent protocol remained armed, but no longer imminent. Ronan took one careful step toward Caldera. You built this plan on speed, Ronan said. Declare emergency and vent before anyone can verify. He kept his voice quiet. But you forgot that purge authority requires dual confirmation when the core is in isolation mode. Caldera blinked once. Ronan saw it land. I isolated the command spine, Ronan said. That forced dual confirmation, and you cannot authorize purge alone now. The room went still except for machine hum. One officer looked at Caldera and spoke carefully. Is that true? The officer asked. Caldera did not answer him. Ronan held her gaze. You would need a second executive token to vent now, Ronan said. And none of them are here. Caldera's control slipped, just slightly. You think this is over? No, Ronan said. I think it is contained. Dr. Celine Cade was still locked in a secondary diagnostic bay when Ronan reached her. Ronan could tell the route had been reopened because corridor lights held steady and doors no longer stuttered. He moved past scorched panels and flickering signs while emergency crews reclaimed access points. The station was breathing again, but he could feel it doing it carefully. He signaled his location to the emergency team, so no one mistook him for an intruder. Then he stopped at the diagnostic bay door and used reinstated clearance from emergency systems to open it. Celine sat on a metal bench, hands cuffed in front of her. Her hair was matted with sweat, but her eyes were sharp. Core? Celine asked. Stable, Ronan said. For now. He knelt and unlocked the cuffs. Celine flexed her wrists once and did not complain. They tried to force me to sign off on the spread report, Celine said. They needed my name to validate contamination level. And you refused? Ronan asked. I told them the numbers were wrong, Celine said. They moved me here after the pod failed. Ronan held her gaze for a beat. He did not ask how the pod failed, because he could tell it would only be interception or sabotage. They stepped back into the corridor together. Farther down the hall, people moved in orderly lines under. Emergency lighting. Among them were residents guided into secure compartments. Ronan watched doors seal behind them, then turned back toward the command wing. In the main operations hall, Caldra stood not with her loyal officers now, but with station investigators and board representatives brought in under emergency authority. Ronan could tell she was still performing calm, because she had trained her face for storms. Ronan approached with Celine at his side. An investigator looked at Ronan first. "You isolated the spine without board approval," the investigator said. "I did it to prevent automatic venting," Ronan replied. "You can review stability logs and isolation state." The investigator turned to Caldra. "You initiated purge protocol based on altered sensor thresholds." Caldra straightened. "I acted to protect the greater structure." Ronan did not interrupt. He waited, because he had learned evidence only mattered if it was allowed to stand where others could see it. "You recalibrated the spread parameter to trigger purge at a lower radius," Celine said. "That would have classified containment as failure." The investigator looked between them. Caldra's voice hardened. "You are both naive," Caldra said. "If the outbreak escalated, hesitation would have doomed the entire station." Ronan spoke without heat. "You bypassed required review and compressed the timeline to avoid scrutiny." He did not insult her. He laid out the chain and let the room do the math. The investigator nodded once. "Executive authority is suspended pending investigation." Security officers who had once stood at Caldra's side shifted position. This time they stepped behind her. Caldra did not resist as they guided her away. She looked back once, and her voice stayed quiet. "You think you saved them," Caldra said. "You only delayed the reckoning." Ronan did not answer. He had no interest in winning the last word. 3 hours later, Ronan could tell the ring air recyclers were back at full capacity because the vents sounded steady and the temperature stopped swinging. The quarantine sector stayed sealed under parameters that looked measured instead of exaggerated. Core stability held at a steady 65%, supported by the emergency battery bank until full grid synchronization completed. Ronan stood on the outer observation deck and looked down at the curve of the planet below. Celine joined him, a data tablet tucked under her arm. "The board wants a public statement. They're trying to frame it as a procedural error." "It was more than that," Ronan said. "It was a choice." "I know," Celine said. She studied him like she was measuring a cost he refused to name. "You should take the lead on testimony," Celine said. "You have the cleaner record." Ronan shook his head. "You have the data and the credibility. They will listen when you speak." Celine's jaw tightened. "They will look for someone to blame for isolating the spine." "I isolated it," Ronan said. "That is not in dispute." "It will cost you," Celine said. Ronan shrugged slightly. "It kept the ring from venting." "That is enough." He did not speak about loyalty or trust. He did not reach for her hand. Instead, he pulled out his badge and placed it on the railing between them. "If they need someone to answer for bypassing protocol, it should be me." Celine stared at the badge and then at him. "You are not stepping down." "I'm standing in front," Ronan said. Below them, transport shuttles moved in slow arcs around the station. Life, stubborn and ordinary, continued. A message pinged on Celine's tablet. She frowned slightly and turned the screen toward herself. "What is it?" Ronan asked. "Long-range rescue signal," Celine said. "It just came in on the outer array." Ronan leaned closer. "From where?" Celine rotated the screen. "From a derelict mining platform beyond the ice belt. It is marked uninhabited for years." Ronan frowned. "There should be no one alive out there." "That is what the registry says," Celine replied. Another alert chimed softly. Celine zoomed in on the attached image. The camera feed showed a section of metallic hull under pale light. Across its surface lay a thin layer of white frost, almost like breath frozen in midair. But the frost pattern was wrong. It curved around something unseen, as if shaped by a recent touch. Ronan felt an old instinct settle in his chest. The station had survived, but he could tell the story had not ended cleanly. "What is the signal strength?" Ronan asked. "Fading," Celine said. "Like someone does not want to be found for long." Ronan picked up his badge from the railing. "Prepare a shuttle." Celine looked at him, eyes narrowing with disbelief. "You just survived a purge." Ronan gave a faint, dry half smile. "I did not survive it to stand still." Ronan watched the planet, turned far below, and felt how small human choices could look from that height. The station behind him hummed steadier now, but he could still hear how close it had come to silence. Ahead, beyond the ice belt, a ghost signal waited in the dark. The thin white frost on metal suggested something had been there very recently. Ronan did not know who had sent it. He only knew one thing. If someone was still breathing out there, he intended to reach them before the silence closed in. If you've ever wondered what you'd do when the safest choice is also the cruelest one, you just found your answer. On Lysander Station, survival wasn't about strength. It was about refusing to let fear write the rules. And somewhere beyond the ice belt, a signal is still fading. A place no one should be alive. A trace of white frost where nothing should be moving. If this story pulled you in, do me a favor. Tap like, share it with someone who loves space survival stories, and subscribe so you don't miss the next call for help. New episodes are coming, and the next one starts where certainty ends.